Hello, this is Leslie, and you're listening to The Interview with Leslie Heaney. Have you ever heard a life story of a person beating all the odds? Someone achieving success despite the most challenging of circumstances? And have you ever wondered, like me, what special stuff these people have? Like what motivates them, or what life experiences or people in their lives made all the difference in them becoming who they are today? I think about these questions a lot, and when I heard about this book, Animals I Want to See, I had to reach out to the author, Tom Seeman, to see if I could get him to come on the podcast to share his story. Thankfully for all of us, he said yes. Animals I Want to See is a memoir about Tom Seeman beating the odds as a boy growing up in the projects of Toledo, Ohio, one of 12 children living in extreme poverty, and from there heading to Yale and then Harvard Law School. Ultimately, Tom ended up with a very successful career in private equity, a wonderful family, and the drive and resources to give back to the school and organizations that made all the difference in making him who he is today. Tom's story is so compelling, and I was so drawn to Tom's determination and focus, and to the heroes, his neighbors and teachers, that guided and mentored him along the way. If you want a little inspiration, tune into this conversation between me and Tom Seeman. You won't regret it. And with that, here's Tom Seeman. Tom, I'm so happy to see you. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mentioning for listeners that Tom and I are not in person in the studio because I am a casualty of a mass food poisoning event at a charity event in my area. The name of the event and the organization will remain, I should say, anonymous, but I'm still recovering. So Tom was kind enough to be willing to come down from Boston to New York to come to the studio, and we are pivoting, and we are doing this now by Zoom. But even so, I feel like we're going to have a great conversation regardless, and thanks for being so flexible.
Well, good. It's good to finally meet you.
Same here. So your memoir, Animals I Want to See, I enjoyed it so much. And
thank you.
So just an overview summary for listeners, it's really your story about your life's journey, beating the odds as a young boy growing up in the projects in Ohio.
Yes.
And then going on to Yale and Harvard Law School, and then a really successful career in private equity. I was so moved by it and really drawn to your determination and focus. And it's so interesting for me to be talking with you because I feel like I know you so well after reading about your incredible life. But tell us about it. So you grew up, you were the middle or number 5 of 12 kids.
Yes.
Tell me about your family.
Yeah. So, I grew up in a family of 14, as you said, 12 kids, 2 parents in the projects in Toledo, Ohio. I had a very wonderful mother, as we'll talk about, I hope. And I had a very difficult father. My mother did a fantastic job of holding the family together. We're a happy family. We're still a happy family together. We've had a range of socioeconomic outcomes, I would say, but everybody's, healthy, great, alive, no substance abuse, no big issues in our family. Very close to my mother, still alive at 92, still living in Toledo. My father died long ago. And the story is, about growing up in those circumstances, but it's a positive book. It's a happy book. I thought I had a happy childhood, and I still think I had a happy childhood, based mostly, I think, on my mother. But it's also about, I think, all the many small kindnesses that were done for me along the way. I think I realized more of those writing the book than I had before. I certainly realized people had helped me, but I realized more by putting it all on paper, how many acts of kindness were done for me. And I try to do that now in my own life for others, because you never know when some small act of kindness will push something over a wall or push through a wall for someone. You don't know how it all adds up, but mine, I think all the acts of kindness done for me added up to my life, in a way. And I find that really interesting. I think the book's also about a sense of wonder. From a very young age, I looked at the world with wonder, and maybe we'll come back to that. And I've continued that through my life, although we all lose a lot of our sense of wonder as we age, because the stresses of life come in, and kids and work and all these things and bills. And they make you see the world less positively. But if you can maintain some sense of wonder, I think it leads to a happier life. And that's worked for me.
It most certainly has. And I was struck by something that your sister said about how your mom made it so that you didn't really even know how poor you were, that she was cooking and cleaning. And this is a quote that I love from the book. He said, maybe love lived in the magic that she wove into the tapestry of the ordinary so that we could grow up in the projects, rarely noticing that we were poor and seldom feeling sad. And when you were just talking about wonder, it made me think about you sort of playing in the field behind your house.
Yeah.
With like plywood and nuts and bolts or glass or whatever was there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of experiencing your environment and having that sense of wonder in a place that maybe would appear challenging to some, but to you it was an exciting art. It was an exciting place.
Yeah, it's true. The field it plays a little role in the book. The field is today, if you look at it, it's this small little area, but to my childhood eyes, it was this big area. It's overgrown weeds and one tree in the middle. And it was a dumping ground, as you said. I didn't realize it, but an old refrigerator door or something, it's there because somebody dumped it. It's not there sort of by nature, right? So the field was full of stuff, and you would turn over the stuff and you would find like a snake, or you would find a rat or something like that. And so that's how I started this list of animals. Well, first, the first list was wild animals I have seen. And I started this list and started putting them down. And that's kind of where the title of the book comes from, because later in the book, I lose that first list and start a new list called Animals I Want to See One Day. And so it's a list of animals that I have never seen, but hope to see. And it's sort of a metaphor for all of my dreams of getting out, because how could a boy in the projects with no money think that he could go see one day an elephant in Africa or a Komodo dragon in Indonesia, things I have done. And I guess the reason that I thought that is I always thought that I was great. I always thought I was getting out. I always thought I was going to have a great life. So I did have that sense of wonder when I looked around, but also a sense of wonder about the world and about animals I want to see.
I love that. And I love that title. When I saw the title of the book, I thought, that's interesting. I'm wondering where that came from. And then I, of course, read and learned about that. And I loved how you pivoted too of the animals that you have seen, which I guess would be limited, right?
Right.
Once you get beyond snake, rat, maybe squirrel or whatever is happening in the environment, you pivoted to this list, but that list represented so much more, right? As you were saying, that list was sort of you really staking a claim and saying, I am getting out of here and I am going to go on and see these animals in all of these incredible places around the world. And you mentioned at the beginning that your dad was difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult, right? Was an alcoholic and not supportive of your mom. On top
of being an alcoholic, though, I think he was a mean person separate from his alcoholism. I think even if he hadn't been a drinker, he would be mean. And I think he's, a person who hated his life and how it came out and took that out on his family. And the book doesn't dwell on it. The book isn't a misery book. It's a happy book. But there are scenes where, to show the truth of it. And I interviewed all my siblings for the book, by the way, to get the truth of it. And I didn't want to portray him as some one-dimensional character who was just bad. But all my siblings, but one, which I point out in the book, said, yeah, no, it was just bad. He would, to my mother, you effing whore, you always give the best food to the kids. It sounds so immature even saying it, right? That how we raise our kids, the thought of giving the best food to the kids would be a good thing, not a bad thing. And my mother would treat it, his claims or his attacks, as though they were just something she should answer. Just, not enabling him, but in an effort to keep the family together, because many families like this come apart. She would just say, "Oh, Harry, I don't give all the best food to the kids, and here's some food for you," or something. When I was young, I would always wonder, why didn't she go back on the attack? But I think it was first of all, it was within her nature to be that way. But secondly, I think it was a good strategy to keep the family together and to try to keep a certain amount of peace. Because if, for example, he left, then she would have to work and family services would show up and say, what are all these little kids doing at home alone all day? So we're going to take them away. That was part of her thinking, I think. So, or she told me later in life, in fact, it was part of her thinking. So plus she was very Catholic, so she wasn't going to divorce him or anything like that. She was very committed to being married, so she just chose the wrong guy, I guess. But thank God she did, because I wouldn't exist otherwise.
Yeah, right, right. There is poor. I mean, yeah, and she did say that to you later because I think at one point you
Yes.
asked her like, "Why don't you leave?" And she said, "If I, you know,
Yes.
his family would be broken up and social services would come." And the way she managed him, and at the same time was able to manage the number of kids that she had, and all
Yes.
the tasks and everything else was really, really incredible. And you had, it's funny when we talk about all the animals I want to see. I loved your friends in your neighborhood. And, sometimes when you would say, I'm going to see, see a tiger or whatever, they'd be like, what? Sort of, like,
Yes.
teasing you, but like great, funny friends. You had these great companions, and that you also had some tough experiences though in your neighborhood.
Well, we were, the book starts with us moving from one projects in Toledo where we are in a building of 3 units, and it's a very, very small space. And at that time, my mother had already had 9 kids. So we're living in less than, I think, 800 feet for, 11 people. It was absolutely crazy. And that place, there's a picture of it in the beginning of the book. It's the only picture in the book. It shows, there's no trees. There's just these brick buildings with flat roofs and very stark environment. It's more like a prison. And then we moved to this new place where we get our own house, which is still small, but it's much better. And, when we moved there, just like in the old projects, we're white, and most of the projects at that time is black. And so we're noticed as the new family, but we're also stand out because we're white. And so I took a few punches for sure, moving to the new neighborhood. But then gradually, as you see in the book, you're accepted as part of the new neighborhood, and you become a fixture in the neighborhood, and these acts of kindness start, and so the man across the street takes us, 3 of us boys fishing. It's kind of a cool image in the 1970s for this black man to have these 3 white boys, and he's teaching them how to put a worm on a hook and doing things that are somewhat fatherly, and I think about him as a father figure in the book. He's kind to me throughout. He does several things in the book for me. So Mr. Noble, which is not his real name, by the way. A lot of the names have been changed, which happens in memoir. So yeah, there are some tough times, but once again, the book doesn't dwell on those, but it presents it, I think, realistically how it really was.
Yeah. But, I really love that message about how even these small acts of kindness, I mean, Mr. Noble took you fishing, and you talk about you got going fishing with him in the boat, but also just how, as you were going on that fishing trip, you thought, there's no really reason for him to be taking us fishing.
Right.
Other than just to be nice and take us fishing, and how much that meant to you, because he actually then was sort of saying to you that you mattered. Right. And though, you had so many of your uncles were people like that for you, and the librarian, and a lot of the priests at the Catholic school that you went to, but before you went to St. Francis and at St. Francis, these people that really kind of invested in you for no other reason than they were just being kind and interested.
I think the later ones, some of them probably invested because they saw promise, but the early ones, I mean, I was a kid that would walk the streets with a rock in one hand and a stick in the other, as I say in the book. And then later I'd be walking around with a gang of kids. And, there was nobody looking at me saying, "Oh, he has promise,"
Right. Yeah.
I mean, maybe my teachers realized it because I was always getting really good grades, and I always sought approval, and I was seeking always to be teacher's pet. So in school, I was always performing. But outside of school, I was doing things as detailed in the book that weren't, that if you got caught could be considered crimes, minor crimes, but crimes like a lot of vandalism. We broke into an old trailer. So technically it's breaking and entering, I guess. I steal from the store. So doing things with these boys that were setting me, I think, in a direction that wasn't ideal. And then I get this scholarship to this special school in Toledo, which is an all-boys Catholic college prep school where you wear a coat and tie. In my neighborhood, it was known as the sissy school because we were all aware that you wore a coat and tie to that school. It was far away from our neighborhood, but that's a very big changing point in my life when I start hanging around with different boys.
You're right. It is that distinction, right, between, the Mr. Noble just being kind to a young boy in his neighborhood who he just sees as a young boy in his neighborhood.
Yes.
Versus these teachers who see your promise and want to invest and help mentor and shepherd you. So you're at your first Catholic school, and you had to check the boxes of where you wanted to apply. And St. Francis was like the was the Yale Harvard, right? On that
Right.
list of other places. And you checked the box, and I forget who it was, a priest or someone at your earlier school said, really, you're going for St. Francis? And you, yeah, I want to try. I mean, you were always, as you said, you sort of, that must have just been sort of innate in you, right? Having this sense of destiny or just wanting to strive for the best. And
Yeah,
you had a place to go.
I mean, what you just said opens a lot of different avenues I could take, but one of them is the sort of nature versus nurture question. You know, was my drive, and we haven't really talked about my drive yet, but yeah, I was a very driven person towards success, and whatever that may have meant to me as a young boy. When I was young, I wanted to be three things: the heavyweight champion of the world because of Muhammad Ali, and I was thrilled with him, or the president of the United States, or the richest man in the world. So these are very unachievable. I wasn't even a boxer, right? So these very unachievable, but very top things. So I was always very driven to that. And was that innate, or did I somehow learn that? And people say, well, how could you have learned it since you were raised in the same family with all these other kids, and they didn't have, some of them had drive, but they didn't all have the same drive as you had. And I would say, well, maybe I learned it because, I did have different influences. We had the same mom and dad, but maybe they treated us differently. Maybe my teachers treated me as their pet, and they didn't treat my sister who came through later as their pet. Who knows what drove me toward that? But I think a lot of it was innate. So one of the reasons we were able to go to the Catholic school, elementary school, was we didn't have any money to pay the school, but the school let us go there for free as long as we worked. So I wanted to tell the listeners that. So they say, how could this poor family go to this Catholic school? It was actually free. But all my siblings before me went to the local public high school after they finished that Catholic grade school. And I was driven to go to a better school. I always thought education was very important, and being in the top place I could be in was what I wanted to do. And so you're right. I took the Catholic school admissions test, calculating that I could go to Central Catholic, which was the least expensive of all of them in the city of Toledo. By the way, all the private schools in Toledo are Catholic. There are none of these kind of private schools that we have in the East Coast where I live now. So I take the exam, and I see on the exam, as you said, these boxes you can check. And one of them is for Central Catholic. And I checked that because I could afford that based on my earnings from my paper route. And I thought the school would give me a job. I just made a calculation without adults participating. I did all this on my own. And then I saw the box for St. Francis, and I knew about St. Francis because you kind of knew about all the schools by the time you're in 8th grade. But secondly, because we played our football games on fields next to St. Francis. So I would look at it and I knew about it. And I checked the box, not thinking about it. And a number of weeks later, I get called to the principal's office. And Sister Ann says, I think I'm in trouble because I never get called to the principal's office. And she says, there's someone here to meet you. And it was Father McMenamin from St. Francis. And I told him, he asked me why I checked the box for Central. And I explained how I had made this calculation. And of course, he was very impressed with that. This little boy making this calculation completely on his own, thinking he was going to pay himself. And I was unaware of scholarships. And he said, well, I can tell you, you can go to St. Francis for free because of your test result.
I don't know if I said this to you when I emailed you, but I cried several times in the book, just sort of moved by these incredible acts of kindness, and just, I guess, knowing where the journey ended up for you, just sort of saying like, gosh, these are these incredible moments that helped, carve this path for you to the life where you are now. But he said to you, you can come, but you have to work. You have to work at the school, right?
And for me, that was nothing, right? Because I've been working as a child janitor at my grade school since I was in 3rd grade. You pointed out earlier, I was a little bit different. I mean, just like the paper route, I was the first in my family to go to a Catholic high school. I was the first in my family to drive myself. I was the first in family to buy a paper route or to get a job. So I'm not like
but then your sister, didn't your sister then take over the paper route and buy this? She printed her own franchise, or her.
And she's impressive too, and I'm not trying to say I'm so great. I'm just trying to point out.
No. I just loved how that was sort of passed on. And
my sister, who was also quite driven, she's 4 years behind me. By the way, and another effect I had was all the siblings behind me, but one went to Catholic high schools after me. So I broke this new ground. And then this sister, in whom I saw promise, who was also a very good student, I wrote her from Yale when I was at Yale, and I said, these are the schools you should apply to. And her guidance counselor at Central Catholic was like, you can't, the students from here don't apply to these schools. And she applied and she got into Cornell. So she's the only other kid in the family that went to an Ivy League school like I did. But I definitely affected the kids behind me in those ways. Those things simply wouldn't have happened. I mean, my sister never would have had the idea to go to Cornell. Yeah. Yeah.
It so much speaks to sort of, the environment you talked about too, the pivotal moment of you going to St. Francis, right? And being around those kids that were there. And I love your group of friends there,
Yes.
right? You guys were.
And I'm still close with that group of friends. There was 6 of us that would hang out together, and we were, I was a big football player, a good football player, and it's one of the reasons I think also I got noticed from a lot of colleges. So I could have hung out with the football players, but I was put into the top class because of my test score. So I was also hanging around with the nerd guys, and they were so driven. We were all competitive to try to reach the top of the class and the rankings and everything. It's a totally new environment where we would sit around at lunch and talk about politics or world affairs or sports or whatever it is. And these are not conversations I was having at home, and they were not conversations I was having with my friends in the neighborhood back home. So that's why I teared up earlier, because it was such a big change moment in my life to be hanging around with aspirational kids who were educating me every day with our conversations, and who I could compete with on a whole different level academically, which drove me to, do extra calculus. At night, I would do extra calculus problems outside of the homework, just out of driving myself to learn more. That's the kind of kid I was, and that's the kind of environment I had been put in. And I'm sure I would not have been doing that if I had gone to a public high school.
And when you went back, though, because you would go to St. Francis during the day, and then you would go to the library, right, to work, because just to come home and have to have that combative exchange with your father was not something that you would just wanted to avoid it, right, and get your work done. And you take the bus yourself and get home at 11 o'clock at night. And you'd get home and your mom would be there, right, and she'd make you a sandwich, or, she would make some food. But there wasn't any, when you got home, it wasn't like you were getting affirmation from your parents or from your peers for any of the things that you had been doing at school, right? Or, they were just, you weren't sort of like, hey, I did extra calculus homework. No, nobody's you on the back. You are just.
I look back and I kind of wonder about it sometimes. How did I do that? Because you're right. I think back to my mentality. It wasn't like I'm getting on the bus, at 11 p.m., as you say, and then walking down Bronson Street alone with my books in a backpack or a bag that I carried, walking down Bronson Street in the middle, almost in the middle of the night, getting home. My mother's waiting up to heat up the food for me. I go to bed, I get up, it's, 5:30, 6 a.m. and do it all over again. And I'm not like, woe is me, or gee, at one point I do say, I want some praise from my mom. And then my shame angel appears on my shoulder and says, hasn't she done enough? Come on. And of course she had done enough, but you always want praise from your parents, particularly the good parent, in my case, my mom. And my mom was not a praiser. It's the only, thing that I point out in the book that, I don't know, could be a shortcoming. But of course, people back then were less that way anyhow. But, I think the world has changed. But still, yes, I was not getting affirmation, but I was getting affirmation, as you pointed out, for example, from a librarian who sort of adopted me as his cause, or from the priests at St. Francis. And back then, Catholic schools were heavily populated by priests and nuns and things like that. So I was getting support, just not from my mom, who, when I came home and said, hey, I'm going to St. Francis, she didn't say, how are you doing that? Or, how are you going to afford it? Or when I come home and I say, I'm going to Yale, my parents had no participation in my college application process or understanding of what I was doing. And so I come home and say, hey, I'm going to Yale. And she says, like, oh, can you hand me that rag or that screwdriver? Because she's cleaning something. It's not like, how are you going to afford that? Or how are you going to get there? Or how did this happen? It is fascinating how unattached my parents were from my processes. Yeah.
I thought a lot about that when I was reading the book. And I also thought, and not to get too far off piece, but I was thinking about how, you were able to go to St. Francis on a full ride because you worked at the school and there was investment from the priest there, and because you were such an extraordinary student. And then you were able to figure out, which I want to get to a little bit later, about how you did pay for Yale and Harvard, but you were always working, always saving. And for kids today that would be in a similar circumstance to you, it'd be so hard for anybody to do that because the cost of education is so high.
But the money is more available today than ever to allow them to, if they belong there, I think. There's
really?
There's a lot of
I
stuff.
guess that is true. I guess that's true. But figuring out, and I guess you asked me earlier before we started recording, just when we were getting our Zoom set up, our daughter's 18 and she's going into her senior year, and we are riding her like Seabiscuit, about are the essays out, who's out, look at your, start working on your essay.
Exactly.
Looking at you and how you were working and handling all these things. And I think that goes, by the way, for all of us today. All parents are very involved in kind of pushing our kids. And I think, gosh, maybe I should let up a little bit and let them, kind of navigate some of these things on their own, because you're such a great example of having that resourcefulness and how well that turns out.
Yeah. One of my daughters says, well, I wish I had grown up like you, Dad, because you had such an interesting childhood and you were able to come from nothing and accomplish all this. And my answer to that is, on the one hand, that's true. Like, I have an incredible sense of confidence in my life because of what I was able to do. But most people don't do what I did, right? Most people in tough circumstances end up not having maybe a great life. A lot of those kids that were in that neighborhood are still in those very difficult lives, And so I look at her and I say, if I was born wealthy, maybe I wouldn't have done what I did. Maybe I wouldn't have been as driven, but I think it was probably innate in me to do it, whatever circumstances I was born into. But I don't buy into her kind of amusing statement that, she now lives very well. Obviously, I've been successful, that she wishes she were back in those circumstances. If I could put her back there one day, she'd want her way out right away. It was pretty funny when she said that to me.
Well, yeah, no, I think that there is that, with this generation, they're wanting the challenge, or they want to have the sort of adverse or be part of a conversation. I think you see some of the protests, for example, at colleges. Some of the kids don't even know what they're protesting, but they want to be part of something. So I can see. So you go to St. Francis, and then your guidance counselor there, you sort of say, hey, I want to apply to Ivy League schools. And you looked at Dartmouth. I love that was your first plane flight. You're going to, right, your first time on a plane, going to see Dartmouth.
Yes.
And you end up getting into Dartmouth and Brown and Yale. The other part I forgot to mention is how your mom, even though she wasn't kind of invested in the way that, parents might be in 2024 cheering their kids in the sidelines at every event, every game and all that stuff. But she did let in the encyclopedia salesman to your house, right? And she did agree to buy these encyclopedias, which was a huge stretch for your family financially.
Yes.
And those encyclopedias opened up your world, right? As both that and then her taking the initiative to send you to that Catholic elementary school, right, where you worked.
Yes.
And you working there, having that obligation for you to work there, I think also kind of, you were getting positive feedback from the teachers there because you're working and you're a janitor. You just kept. So your mom also did sort of give you that. Right. And opening that world up to you.
My mom deserves incredible amount of credit and praise. And I think she got us to get to go to the new house rather than the old house, the new projects. She got us to go to the Catholic school by asking the priest whether we could go there for free, and him saying, as long as they work. She does all these things. Absolutely. But the main thing about my mom, I would say, is her modeling of her, her behavior, right? It's not only incredibly hardworking, taking care of all the work for all of us kids. And she later said she did that out of necessity, but also because she wanted to let us try to let us have a real childhood where we weren't constantly doing all the work, and that we would have time also to do our studies. So she was very focused on education too. But in addition to all the hard work, my mom is an example of someone who goes the extra mile. And by going the extra mile, I mean when she would make desserts all the time and make good food all the time, even though she didn't have enough money to really do it, but she would pull off meals. And when she would make, for example, cookies, she wouldn't just make simple cookies. She would make complex, ethnic cookies. And as soon as she finished making these dozens and dozens of cookies, because there were so many of us, they would be consumed in a matter of hours. So my mom would not only do all the hard work, but she would go the extra mile. And what I mean by that is whenever she did anything, she would do it. Like if she's cleaning, she would clean more than most people would clean. She would like take the screens out of the windows and clean the screens, but she would also clean, the railing where the screen goes in. She would have a screwdriver with a rag around it, cleaning in the area down there, like in the projects, right? Where just keeping the basics clean was difficult. So my mom would make desserts where she would make, rather than making just chocolate chip cookies where you drop the dough on the pan, she would make, pinwheel cookies where she would roll out chocolate and white dough and then roll them together and then cut them into these and bake these pinwheel cookies. So, and as I said, and you would eat them, they would be eaten immediately after she finished. All these dozens of cookies would disappear. So why make that extra effort? And I think it was just innate. And that caused me, I think, in my life to do the same. When I would clean the toilets as a janitor, I would reach behind the toilet, and you might say, why would you do that? And I would reach behind, by the way, with my hand. I've always been completely unafraid of mess, of human mess for whatever reason. And it was like, for me, I couldn't not clean behind the toilet. Like it's part of the cleaning. And eventually that going the extra mile, I think, is noticed. When I'm cleaning behind the toilet, nobody's noticing. But eventually, if you continually do that in your life, when you go the extra mile, you do the extra calculus problems rather than just the ones that are assigned, it pays off, and people notice, and in your jobs, people notice, and you get more and more out of people getting behind you because they realize that you're doing something special.
I love that sentiment of sort of cleaning behind the toilet, meaning kind of doing that extra thorough job that nobody may even necessarily notice right away, but it's just being that thorough and that committed. And your mom, even in her difficult circumstances, making that extra effort, right, and having the pride to clean the windows the way she was and to make those special cookies. And I want to talk a bit later too about what you're doing now in terms of all the things that you do to give back to your community. But when you were identified by one of your teachers as having a real gift in art, you started taking classes at the Toledo Art Museum. Your dad was supposed to pick you up one day. Your dad was a taxi dispatcher, right? So sometimes he'd send a taxi to get you. Nobody came. And a police officer was asking, when a police officer, nobody came to pick me up. And obviously there's no phones. I mean, I don't know if there was a payphone. You didn't have any money to put in anyway. And he gave you money, right, to take the bus home and told you how to take a bus home. And you really internalized that, one, that he trusted you to follow his instructions. I think you were 11, 12, right? And
I was younger. Yeah, I was younger than that. But yes.
That made a big impact on you.
Yeah. So I'm this little kid, and I get free art lessons at the Toledo Museum of Art on Saturdays. And that day, my father was actually supposed to come to get me himself. And because he's drinking at a bar, he would often leave my mother at the store or leave, not pick up, not be where he's supposed to be. A very unreliable person. And that's how alcoholics are. And so I was there. And as the kids start to get picked up, the numbers are dwindling. And I'm thinking, as long as there's a few here, I'm still safe. And eventually it dwindles to zero. And I'm standing there alone for a long time. And I start crying. And the police officer there, who's supposed to be directing traffic and get the kids across the street, sees me and helps me get home by giving me money for the bus and telling me how to take the first bus from Collingwood downtown, connect to the Stickney bus, which is the bus that goes out to my neighborhood, and tell the driver to drop me off at the end of Bronson Street. And then I would walk down Bronson Street. And I'm scared, right? Because I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm going to get on the right bus when I get downtown. I don't know if the driver is going to be nice and really drop me, help me get off at the right spot. I don't know how all this operates, where you pull the string and it dings and you go to the right stop. So when I learned this, it's like freeing, because now I can if I ever get in trouble, I don't feel as at risk. I feel like I can handle myself in a way that was just taught to me by this person doing this act of kindness that he didn't have to do, this police officer. Yeah.
Yeah. So you go to Yale, you then apply to Harvard Law School, you get a perfect score on your LSAT, which,
yes,
as someone who took it myself, I really understand how difficult that is as a fellow lawyer. So, it's incredible. And you go into Harvard Law. And how did you end up getting involved in private equity? What was
I really should have gone to probably the JD MBA, but even then I wasn't getting enough good advice. But anyhow, I go to Harvard Law, and I do go to Wall Street for 2 years in a big law firm, and I get recruited away by an investment bank. So I'm in the whole Wall Street game. I'm working at a big investment bank, and that's how I moved toward business. And so many lawyers that I know that are corporate lawyers look across the table and sort of want to be the business guy, because the business side is, after you do a certain number of deals as a lawyer, I think the business side looks more interesting because there's more diversity over there. There's more excitement. There's more. And so I was doing M&A law. So I learned how to acquire companies. I actually work at McKinsey for a long time first, which is a big consulting firm. And then I go out and buy my first company. Well, I start my first company in Germany with some McKinsey colleagues. We sell that. And then I come back to the US and buy my first company with money that I have earned. So rather than working at a private equity firm and raising a fund, I actually bought my first company with money I had saved. And that company worked out well. And so that launched me on this life of owning companies and usually running them as the CEO.
While you were at Yale, you spent your junior year abroad in France, and
Yes.
you were very committed, right, to learning the French language. Your friends were like, your American friends were like, can we just talk in English and have a nice line? And you were
Right.
speaking French and you wanted to immerse yourself. But during that experience, you made a comment in the book that one day you were wearing shoes there, or found shoes over there, that you eventually ended up later in your life owning that shoe company. Tell me about that.
Yes. Yeah. So the brand is called Etonic. Yeah. And it was a big, running brand back when, back in the 70s, 80s, worn in a lot of marathons and stuff like that. And then it faded as a brand. It had several owners who didn't, and it was owned by Spalding, which is in Massachusetts. And they owned a lot of brands back then, a lot of sports brands. And they were in financial trouble because they had been bought by KKR, a big buyout firm that had loaded them with debt. So they were shedding assets. And one of them that we decided to buy was the Etonic brand. So yeah, it sort of came full circle that my first pair of running shoes in my life were Etonics. And I end up owning the company later in life. Yeah. And I was the CEO, and we eventually sold that to an Italian company.
And so what are you doing that still now? Is that what your work, are you?
Yes. Other than writing books, yes, which takes a lot of time, writing that book. But yes, I still own companies, and I am not the CEO. I am a chairman of a company now, but I'm not the CEO of a company. So the last company I was CEO of that I had bought, also I sold about 5 years ago to Nomura, which is a Japanese public company. So that was a company that did research for large asset managers. So that was a really good deal for me. Yeah.
You still get together with your siblings, right? Everyone gets together and everyone is happy.
Yes.
And I'm assuming when you go back, it's probably the same as when you went back as a kid, right? No one's asking you about that deal or that sale.
Yeah. And in fact, absolutely, first of all, but in fact, there's probably some judgments too, right? That's what I came to realize through writing the book. I mean, I realized it before, but I realized a lot of things more about my family in writing the book, because I'm writing about them, I'm interviewing them, I'm receiving some support from some and some resistance from others about even doing the project, because some of them don't know what it is, or maybe some of them think it's going to be a look at me kind of book, a self-aggrandizing book, which it's not at all, because it ends, when I'm finishing at Yale, it's not about my adult life at all. It's about the story of coming of age in the projects, really, and how I sort of at least got to Yale and Harvard, but nothing beyond that. But so we all get together every Thanksgiving in Toledo. Obviously, my mother, no longer in the projects or anything like that, lives in a really nice house, frankly, that I bought for her, and has had a great life since my father passed away many years ago. When he passed away, I'm sure she missed him because she was used to him, and probably even loved him. But now I think her life is so much more stress-free. She's still alive at 92. We all go back. We all get along. There's no great animosities. There's no substance abuse. There's no one on welfare in my family. So everyone's done quite well. But I mean, I've done the best financially speaking, and a couple others have done quite well. And then we have a range of socioeconomic outcomes across my family, but we still all get along really well. So we're very fortunate. So
great. I love, there was a part in the book when you're watching your mom do all the laundry, and you say, like, one day I'm going to buy her a washing machine. And you end up saying, not only did I buy her a washing machine, but I got to buy her a house, which I thought was really beautiful. So these experiences of, like Mr. Noble taking you fishing or the police officer giving you the money, you internalize those even then at the moment, right? And thought one day I want to be able to make that kind of impact in someone else's life. And you kind of even then had a commitment or knew at some point or hoped at some point that you'd be in a position to give back to others. And now you're involved with the Boys and Girls Club on the board there in Boston. You're involved in the Board of Trustees of the Museum of Fine Arts there. What have those organizations meant to you? How has it felt for you to be in a position to be able to impact those institutions and other people's lives?
In my high school too, yeah. So
I want to talk about the incredible
yeah. So I definitely wanted to give back. And I mean, one of the things I've done, which I don't mention also, is when I got to Boston, I took on a young man and became his personal mentor in his life. And now he's married with kids and everything, and it's turned out really well. But he came from, a known tough neighborhood in Boston, and I connected with him. So I think giving of personal time, we can all join boards and give of our money and stuff like that, but also giving of time on those boards, obviously, as well. And I do that at the Boys and Girls Club. And I think that organization has a huge impact. But I also like the idea of this personal mentoring situation. And I almost wish I had taken on more personal mentoring situations, but you only have so much time in your life and you have your own family, et cetera. And then the museum, it's like, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston is a major world museum. It's kind of like coming full circle because I, got those free art lessons at the Toledo Museum of Art, and my getting involved in the museum here, the museum maybe has less of a direct impact on the types of people that are growing up the way I grew up. And that's more the Boys and Girls Club or my personal mentoring of that one young man, or what I've done at my high school is more focused on helping people that are coming from more disadvantaged background. The museum less so. The museum definitely tries to get those people to come to the museum, and it has all kinds of programs. But I'd say the museum is a little bit different. It's more appealing to my artistic sense, my love of art, which began when I was a young boy, and that's sort of coming full circle now in my involvement as the chair. I'm the chair of the finance committee at the museum now. So definitely doing a lot of work there, if the chair of the finance committee. So I've committed a fair amount of my time in recent times to that. One of my brothers says, "Why do you do that? Why don't you do just all organizations like schools or all organizations like the Boys and Girls Club?" And I guess I'm allowed to have one artistic one.
Yeah, but I think that there are, the kids that go to the museums and you saw how your exposure to the Toledo Art Museum
Yes.
your world. I mean, I
Exactly.
think it does have that the potential for a real great impact for kids that are from underserved areas too. I mean, it's not the same.
Yeah, exactly.
As the Boys and Girls Club, but definitely it has that wider or more subtle possibility of impact. And I think you talk about having a mentee. I myself did that with an organization in New York where you not only mentor your mentee through high school, and you also help to support them. They go to Catholic school, and so you actually help pay for their education, but you are their mentor and help them with the whole process.
Right.
Anyway, just having one caring adult in your life who helps, who just is interested in you and takes you out for coffee or dinner or to a show, or, just being interested and asking questions and helping point you in the right direction. I mean, you're kind of living proof of what kind of a difference that can make, right?
Right. So we're still really close friends, and his family comes to we have a house up in Maine, and his family comes there in the summer. But he was recently at my book event, which was kind of cool to have Donovan there asking a question at my book event. It's sort of like, we're now grown-ups together and talking about different topics. Yeah.
Oh, that's so great. I think also for him to learn more about you and hear your story. I mean, I'm sure he's heard your story from you, but being able to read it in that detail or learn more about it, I'm sure has a great meaning for him too.
Yes.
So one of your other incredible contributions is this $1 million donation that you made to St. Francis. Tell us about that. Just so meaningful.
Yeah, so it's not just a $1 million donation. It's a scholarship donation, but it's a special kind of scholarship which is designed to have the school go out into the neighborhoods, like my old neighborhood, and talk to community leaders and teachers and say, do you have a boy who or boys who could make it through St. Francis? And if so, we have the money to bring them to St. Francis. So it's an idea of outreach to the communities, much like they did with me. I guess I kind of brought myself to their attention through my test score, but a kid like me normally wouldn't have gone to St. Francis. So the idea is to go out and find more kids like me, but not kids that are necessarily as high academically as me, but ones that could make it through and whose lives would be changed by going to St. Francis, and then using that money to give them scholarships. And it's not an endowed scholarship. It's meant to use the money now, right? Because the world is changing so fast. Like, we don't even know if St. Francis will make it, if it will be here in 20 years, right? So I didn't want to give to an endowment where we would have $10,000 a year for scholarship money. I wanted to give the $1 million for use now, for use over these number of years, maybe over 10 years or whatever, to be able to give a bunch of boys now the opportunity to go to St. Francis. And when that money runs out, then maybe there's more, but that's the idea of how it works. Obviously,
endowed scholarships are terrific, but being involved in some educational institutions myself, it's hard because the amount that you need to donate in order to even, as you said, maybe you give $1 million and you're able to give, $10,000 a year in scholarship money,
right,
making the incredible impact. You will obviously over time, but your gift makes it possible for a lot of kids to go.
Yes.
And sooner than later, right?
Yes, that's the idea.
That's terrific. Now, have you been able to go back and meet any of those kids? Or?
I have met a lot of them, and I was back recently and gave a little talk at a scholarship breakfast and met some more of them. So it's fascinating to see them growing up and see them, going off to college and things like that. And once again, it's a group of kids that some of them are at the very top of their class, and some of them are, struggling to make it through, but I think they're gonna make it through. Some of them don't make it through. Some of them have dropped out, of St. Francis and gone back to their public school or whatever. So it's a real effort, but I'm happy with the spending and happy with what it's doing.
So good. So wonderful. So Bill Clinton wrote a review about your book, and I think Bill Clinton encouraged you to write the book.
He did.
How do you know Bill Clinton, and tell us about that?
So, so I've supported certain candidates along the way. And one of the people I was supporting was, frankly, Hillary. And so Bill Clinton came to an event at my house and sat with me and talked with me for a while. And he had clearly been prepped on me beforehand and was really into the story. A lot of people don't know that, Bill Clinton, his father died before he was born. His father died in a car crash before he was born. So he was raised by his mother and grandmother, and also a sort of an abusive alcoholic stepfather. So the story isn't that different from mine, and not, he wasn't raised in the projects, but he was raised in, I think, difficult circumstances. So he really got into my story, and he's famous for really focusing on who he's talking to. And man, he was.
Did you get sucked into his?
Oh man, he was focused, and and spent, like, they were like, it's time to go, and he's not even hearing his handlers telling him it's time to go. And so he said, you have to write this book. And so that was, and I had been thinking about it, anyhow. So it sort of pushed me over the wall, and I dug into writing it. And when I wrote it, I contacted him and said, hey, I wrote this book. Remember that you told me to write? And so he
it's time. Yeah.
wrote me a blurb. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's so great.
He read the book. Yeah.
And you found another, now, gosh, her name is escaping me, but another author who had written her own memoir to kind of help you write it. I mean, did you find the process of writing it? I mean, you talked about you went back and interviewed
Yes.
siblings and people in your neighborhood, and Mr. Noble isn't Mr. Noble and all that stuff. But did you find the experience of actually doing it must have been cathartic in a way? I mean, tell us about the
writing process was very interesting. So, because I'm a business guy and lawyer, I have a certain style of writing, which I was writing parts of it, and it wasn't that good, and I could tell. And so I hired a writing coach, and she was a phenomenal part of the process. We developed a really close relationship. She obviously got to know me really well to be able to help me through this process and learn all about these details of my life. And some of the details, of course, didn't make it into the book. So she knows an awful lot about my background. She participated in the interviews with my family, which I think actually helped, because I think me interviewing my brother would be kind of odd, but this third party participating. So there are so many ways in which her role helped get this book out and helped my writing improve as well. That I have to say, if anybody were going to write a memoir and hadn't written something like novelistic before, because my memoir is kind of novelistic, it's kind of a literary memoir in a certain way. You got to find the right one. And I was lucky that I found the right one. But if you find the right one, I think it's a key part of the process.
Yeah.
Because like just even writing, like how do you connect scenes, or, what's good, really good dialogue? These are the sorts of things that she would say, look, I wouldn't just go do a business deal and think I could do it like you, because you're practiced at it. You spent your whole life learning, and I've spent my whole life writing books like this. And I have certain methods and ways, and she's been a teacher as well of writing. So she knows how to do it. And that's what I didn't know. And she, as she said to me several times, you're good at knowing, what you don't know and hiring what you don't know. And that is actually a hallmark even of me as a CEO. I don't come in and I'm in charge and I'm the CEO. I know that I'm in a new business when I buy it, and that the people there know it so much better than I do. So please give me all your input, and then I'll be the ultimate decision maker about big things. But I want all of your input. Yeah.
It's funny, I could sort of lost myself in the book, kind of wanting to see what happened next. And you sort of, obviously knew it was a memoir, but it read, it was very easy to consume.
Okay.
And you really kind of, were rooting for you, and excited for you the whole time, and your trajectory.
I've heard that from a lot of people, that it's easily read, and also the audiobook just came out, and people are really, it was not read by me. I had the choice of reading it myself or having an actor read it. And my publisher said, even though a lot of memoirists or even authors like to read their own book, it's actually, in his opinion, better to have an actor read it, because like they do the different voices and stuff like that. And people that have been listening to it, I just listened to a little bit of it so far. People have said it's really, really fantastic what the reader did. So I'm really happy about that as well.
Oh, that's so great. Well, it's funny. I want my children to read it to learn about your story. And we have 3 children, and one of them, our youngest, reminds me a little bit of you, and that he's got, paper roots, and he trades antiques, and he's just like,
wow,
driven and talking, right. How he's going to have a castle in Scotland one day. It's
right,
right. It's, you sort of like, this kid is different than the other, just sort of how he's so focused on.
Yes.
Would you say that there was one, and I think we've probably covered a lot of it, but it wasn't one particular thing, probably, in your opinion, that led you on your trajectory, right? It was a combination of factors.
Right.
And what would you say that those are?
There are so many, but I would say the ones that stand out the most are the many acts of kindness.
Yep.
That were done for me along the way, and that I hope I can do for others. I would say looking at the world with a sense of wonder.
Yeah. I
would say the drive toward hard work. But finally, I would say even in my darkest moments, I always thought that I could change my ending. I had this belief that I could change my ending. And I think that we tend to believe the stories we tell ourselves. So if we're in a tough situation, and some people listening may be in tough situations right now, if you believe if you tell yourself you have no hope versus you tell yourself you have a chance, it doesn't mean you're going to overcome it or win, but if you tell yourself you have a chance, you at least will take action. And I think usually action is better than no action against problems. So I was an action taker. I was a hard worker who went the extra mile, who believed in myself, who believed I could change my ending, and it worked out.
Yeah. So the hope, like having the hope, and probably you'd also say cleaning behind the toilet. Literally.
Right. Right. That helped. Yes.
So what is next for you? Have you gotten the writing bug now that you've written this memoir, or we're going to continue all these incredible, business successes, or what do you see on the horizon? Have you seen all the animals, by the way?
Well, unfortunately you keep adding, and my family's kind of gotten into it. It's not like we're obsessed and we go every year and go see something, but we do go on animal trips to see certain animals in the wild and target certain animals in the wild. So, last year we were in Uganda and Rwanda.
Oh, great.
And this year we just went to Italy. No cool animals there, but lots of cool other stuff. And then next year we're trying to go to Malaysia to see the orangutans, because, all these habitats, seeing animals in the wild is harder and harder, right? Because the habitats are shrinking, and
Yep.
They're getting more and more tamed and more habituated to humans. So are you really seeing them in the wild? So trying to get to a few of the larger cool animals before it's maybe not possible.
The other thing I forgot to mention that I think is one of your strategies of your strengths is making lists, right? You made the list of all the animals that you want to see. You have a list. I think it's called your secrets to success or steps to success.
Steps to success. Yep.
Were you always making lists, or what was?
Yeah. And I haven't talked enough about that in any of these interviews. I think it's a real. I think list making is a real good discipline. And I have lists all around me. You know, you don't always perform against all of them, but I think it brings a certain satisfaction to the mind and makes you feel more settled and planned about things if you capture all the ideas. You know, I had a conversation yesterday that someone was giving me suggestions, and right after the call, I make a list of the ideas from that call. Even you could just call it call notes, I guess, but it was actually a numbered list of the things that the person had said that I should probably do. It was in pursuit of something. So yes, I'm very much a list maker. I very much believe in it. I do believe it works, even if you don't accomplish everything on the list. But it's a certain mental discipline that to me brings me a certain calmness that I've captured it all. Yeah.
Like, haven't people said that in order for you to realize your goals, you have to actually write them down. You have to articulate them. So when you have your list, do you have sort of like the bigger picture list and then sub lists? Meaning, like, if one of your lists is like, our goal is to,
write a book,
company, right, or write a book, right, and then you'd have your steps, right, and then I'm sure you have lists that are like work out or
right,
well, whatever. You probably have other task lists, but
yes,
have those sort of broader aspirational lists. I mean, you have all the animals I wanted.
I used to have lists and sub lists, but I'm less organized about it now because probably I'm at a certain stage of life also where I've
checked a lot of the boxes.
I've accomplished more than I had on those lists when I was younger. So I'm pretty satisfied, frankly. And now I have some goals, but not, some people keep things going, and sadly, many people never achieve those things that they had when they were young. I was fortunate to be able to do that. I think that's what my daughter was meaning when she was saying that to me about having grown up the way I did. I had certain things I wanted to accomplish, and I got there. It's probably harder when you already start quite far ahead, right? But no, I'm quite satisfied now. I still do lists, but I don't have an overarching list of huge goals because I still have some in my mind, but they're not on a list because I've accomplished all of them.
Yeah. So next for you, I don't know if we fully answered the question. Is there anything that you want to do philanthropically yet, or maybe it's in the secret, vault that you haven't yet, you're not ready to reveal?
Yeah, there are a few small things I think about that I still could do. There's this thought about, now that I've finished this book and I'm doing this media tour and things, but eventually I'm going to have more time because I'm not writing that book. Am I writing another book? Am I devoting that time to something else? I'm still active in business and I still enjoy that. I've got to be honest, I still enjoy making money. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm coming from the projects. All you think about in the projects is money all the time, and everybody around you the same way. So it's a very important part of life that some people I know don't like that as much today as they used to, but it's a pretty important thing when you come from the projects. So I still enjoy that, the victory of having done a good deal and run a good company and sold it, or having made a good real estate investment or something like that. There's a certain satisfaction with all the judgment that comes into doing that right, and all the hard work.
And creating value, right?
Absolutely. Creating jobs, creating value, whatever people want to say. It absolutely works. The economy does not work without all of this business stuff going on, creating deals, creating activity, which adds economic value to the economy. A lot of people don't understand economics. That's how it works. And that's why we're such a great country, is we have these mechanisms that allow us to create companies and create new entities and new jobs so easily compared to so many other countries.
Well, maybe it's Tom Seeman for president. I mean, that might be my next suggestion.
That's not one, but not one.
But we certainly could use great people like you. But Tom, whatever you do, I know it's going to be extraordinary. And it was such a pleasure to meet you. And I'm really so inspired by your life story and your example. And I just really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate this time together as well. I'm really glad to finally meet you.
That brings us to the end of this episode of The Interview. A huge thank you again to Tom Seeman for joining. And as always, thank you all again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or follow us on Instagram at The Interview with Leslie Heaney. A new podcast is released every Wednesday. Until then, this is Leslie, and don't forget to join The Interview.